Hey there, storytellers, welcome back to my channel and welcome to another video. Today's video is going to be a review, and it's a little bit different for me because I have never reviewed a poetry collection to my knowledge. So without any further ado, let's get into this. Today I will be reviewing The Lost Spells by Robert Macfarlane and illustrated by Jackie Morris. I won't lie, this midnight blue with the gold foil stars and the like golden white barn owl swooping down and the title The Lost Spells, it had all the cottagecore witchy vibes just on this cover in the title. It drew me in. I couldn't resist it, so that is why I picked it up. I'm shamelessly admitting it was totally just because of the name and the cover. I didn't know much about it. I looked into it a little bit and found out it was a collection of poems about and inspired by nature, so that's what I knew going into it. But now let's talk about my thoughts. First off, let me get you familiar with the kinds of things that are in this book. That way you know what you're walking into should you decide to pick it up. I want to start by reading a little bit of the preface that says, "This is a book of spells to be spoken aloud. It tells its stories and sings its songs in paint and word. Here you will find incantations and summoning charms, spells that protect and spells that protest, tongue twisters, blessings, lullabies, and psalms. So let these spells ring far and wide, speak their words and seek their art. Let the wild world into your eyes, your voice, your heart." I read you a little bit of the preface, but the preface and the glossary both encourage the reader's interaction with the book in more ways than just reading it with their eyes. It asks readers to read each poem or spell aloud in order to savor the feeling of the words on their tongues and let it put the reader in the space of the creatures or plants or whatever. It put you in their shoes, so to speak, so that you can share in their experiences as well and help keep them cherished and alive. The glossary further encourages readers' interaction by kind of creating a scavenger hunt, if you will, of finding different creatures named in the glossary throughout the book, and then taking the book in that glossary and stepping out into nature and seeing if you can identify those creatures or plants for yourself. I'd like to get you familiar with the glossary a little bit. Let me just pull it up. So, I'm not sure how well you can see, but it is double-paged basically, and one page is mostly illustrations of plants and animals, and then on the other side there's a little bit more illustration, but you might be able to tell that some of them are picked out in like this gold font and some of them are just in black. And what I found out was that the yellow font refers to the creatures and plants that have poems within the book. The glossary itself has even more, and it is a reference point, like I said, sort of a scavenger hunt for different illustrations within the book for you to go and find the creatures and plants that match up with it. So it's a little bit fun exploring. You can go through and match up the ones to their poems, but you can also have a fun time looking through and trying to find the other illustrations of the other creatures in the book as well. Now, there seems to be a few different poem formats, but the one I recognized the most were acrostic poems, which are stanzas or poems that have stanzas beginning with the first letter in the word of the title. So for example, the one entitled Snow Hare has the first stanza starting with the word snow, the second one starting with the word night, the third one starting with the word out, spelling out the words snow hare. Stylistically, some of the longer poems alternate between standard and italic fonts, and I suspected in some of them it was very obvious that the italics was to indicate a back and forth conversation, while in others it appeared to be just for emphasis. I might have missed some other denotation that the italics were supposed to be pointing out, but as far as I could tell, it was either to indicate a conversation or just to emphasize a point that the author was trying to make. The final poem in the collection, Gray Birch, is the only one to be further denoted by a subtitle, which is a lullaby. This is possibly serving two different sort of goals, if you will. Stylistically, I think it's written more along the lines of a song rather than just a verse poem. I think it would lend itself to music really well, and that's why it sort of stood out against the others as a lullaby rather than just another poem. And two, it's rather fitting. It is the last poem in the book, so it's kind of like the readers bidding goodnight to the creatures and the stories told within. Another thing I took note of was that an illustration of the creature or plant that is being discussed in the poem precedes and follows the poem itself. So, for example, moth at the beginning, moth at the end. And of course, there's lots of moth illustrations in the middle, but that is common for each of the poems in this collection. In terms of illustration storytelling, there is a layer there that, at least I'm assuming, we start with our friend, the red fox. He kicks off the story, as well as being the one to formally end the stories. And I'm saying stories because that's what it felt like. It felt like hearing stories about animal friends and plant friends, and it was just cozy and welcoming and really approachable. Even if you've not read a lot of poetry in your life, if you just love nature, I would highly, highly recommend it. It is such a cute little book. Tired of holding it. I'm gonna put that up there. So now that I've gotten you familiar with the poems and the way the book is set up and the way you're kind of meant to take it in and use it, I thought I would share some of my favorite things about it because I gave it a 5 out of 5. It is a great little collection of nature-inspired poetry, and I think it's just great to get out and read on any day, but I think it would be particularly great to read during the springtime when you can sit outside and listen to nature and be amongst the trees or near a brook or anything, just somewhere where you can get really immersed in the magic of it all. In general, I found I preferred the longer poems to the shorter ones, mostly because I felt it gave more room to sort of engage with what the author was trying to convey with each piece. It allowed you to connect to the creature or plant that he was trying to get you to connect with a little bit more, in my opinion. It's not for everybody. Some people might like the shorter pieces and think that they convey the point more concisely than a longer poem would, but my personal preference was that I liked the longer ones better. The Lost Spells is also sort of a companion sister work to their first work together, The Lost Words, so it's not exactly a sequel, but it kind of complements it, and it follows that same kind of idea of the world and nature being kind of musical and putting that musicality into words for people to speak aloud and hear. And I know with The Lost Words, they did a whole project where they actually set it to music while the poems were being read, and it sounds phenomenal. I haven't found it or like listened to it, but it sounds like it would be great. I'd love to hear any of them put to music from The Lost Spells, but in particular, I think Grey Birch would be perfect, especially because that subtitle says a lullaby, so I'd love to hear it put to like this melodic lullaby music. It just sounds like it would be so peaceful and cute. My favorite illustrations. Some of my honorable mentions for top spot were the red fox close-up at the beginning of with his eyes. I thought that was beautifully done. It's just such an intense picture, basically. Next we have the big strong oak tree weathering out the winter with a dear companion. Look, he drew me in. It would be totally unfair for him not to make the honorable mentions list, and that is the barn owl at night. He's perched and he's looking off into the wintry distance. As an ocean lover at heart, I thrive when all things sea come up, so seeing the oyster catchers diving into the waves crashing on the rocks was just, I got it. I related to that one, which is funny because it's not an illustration related to the poem that it's part of, but I still loved it. Next we have a badger speaking to a woodpecker in a hole, and this one is from my favorite poem in the whole collection, and I will explain why, but it is such a cute little illustration. I just love it. And we have the red fox again, only this time he's asleep, burrowed amongst the silver birches, getting his wintry rest on. And last but not least, my absolute favorite illustration in this whole collection was of the thrift flowers with a giant kestrel falcon in there. It is such a cool illustration. It's beautiful and powerful and delicate and strong all at once. It's kind of the culmination of everything that is nature. You know, it's so multifaceted, but beautiful in that multifacetedness. Okay, I mentioned that my favorite poem had something to do with the illustration of the badger and the woodpecker, and that is because my favorite poem in the entire collection was the woodpecker. This one was one of the more unique ones, I felt, which is partly why it stood out to me, but it was actually just a really fun, cute poem that just made me really feel like I was getting a sense of the animals' personalities more than some of the other ones did. So there's a series of illustrations that flow throughout the poem of the badger kind of getting closer while the woodpecker is going about his business, and there's this back and forth within the poem of the speaker and the woodpecker answering, and these illustrations imply that the badger is speaking to the woodpecker, so it's kind of like a fun animal conversation. This is one of those ones where stylistically the woodpecker's speaking is denoted by italics while the sort of narrator's voice is in that standard font. The badger, or the narrator, really wants the woodpecker to quiet down. He's just trying to get some rest, but the woodpecker is saying that he doesn't want to. He's doing his job and he's happy to be doing it, and he's just very jovial and quick, and there's almost a sense of like innocent mischievousness, if that makes sense. Like he's knows he's bothering the badger, but he doesn't feel bad because he's not doing it to bother the badger. He's just going about his life doing what he's supposed to do. Some of the poems really encourage you to slow down while you're reading it and absorb what's being said. Not this one. This one, the back and forth kind of mimics that back and forth of a conversation, but it also mimics the staccato pace of like a woodpecker knocking on wood. It leaves you with this sense of playfulness. You just want to laugh and smile while you're reading it, and it also leaves you with the sense of sympathy for the woodpecker because so many of us sit there kind of wishing they'd be quiet, right? I know a lot of people get annoyed by hearing woodpeckers go, and he's not doing it to be annoying. He's just doing it because that's his role in this world, and it's an important one, and if he didn't, the world wouldn't be the same as we know it. And it's just kind of eye-opening in that way, but it's also really, like I said, jovial and happy, and it makes you want to befriend the animal creatures even though they're having this back and forth about someone wanting it quiet while the other guy's just trying to do his job. Like I said, the entire collection is beautiful. I would absolutely recommend it if you are a nature lover or if you just want to take time to slow down and appreciate the small things in life. It is definitely something I would recommend just to anyone, really, anyone. Pick it up. It's fantastic. Just trust me. Read it. So before I leave you officially, I will end with my favorite quote from the collection, which is actually not from my favorite poem. It is from the poem entitled Thrift, and it says, "Thrift blooms on spoil heap and tailing, for thrift knows hardship is a limit, not a failing." I really like that one because I feel like it sums up nature as a whole and kind of the mentality you need to deal with life as a whole. It's just a fact that both in nature and in life, you're going to encounter difficulties and hardship and things that aren't easy, but they're just limits. They're not failings. If you can't handle them right away, you haven't failed. Just keep going. And I think that's a beautiful message. It was kind of interwoven through everything, but I liked that line because it kind of picked it out and said it in really beautiful but plain words, and it just kind of smacked me while I was reading it, which is why I wanted to share it with you guys. But that is it for this video and for my first poetry collection review. If you enjoyed it, do let me know by leaving a like down below. And are you poetry fans? If so, do you have any recommendations for me to read? Because I do actually like to pick up a poetry collection every once in a while just to keep my literary brain alive. It makes me look at things differently because poems are so specifically formatted most of the time. You're meant to be noticing certain things in certain ways, and they're styled to fit that need. So I like to give my brain a little mental exercise with poetry. But for now, I'm going to get going. If you want to keep up with me and all of my bookish adventures, you can go ahead and click the subscribe button. And of course, I highly recommend that you ring the little bell so that you don't miss a beat, because it will notify you every time I post a new video, which has been twice a week for the most part this year, and I'm trying to stick to it. So ring that bell so you don't miss it, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye!